Hello. Is this microphone working? Hello. I'm in the finished basement of my childhood best friend's house just outside Saratoga, New York, where I'm sleeping until we get up to go skiing in Vermont with our other two good buddies from high school. That is where I'm at. That is why I am not posting more than my amazing interview with David Rothkopf today. No news segment. I told you this was going to be a scattered and light week with the board meeting and my traveling to Vermont to ski and then picking up Ava at Ithaca College, where she is a freshman and kicking ass for her winter break on Friday. Also seeing my parents on Thursday. So lots going on, lots of time with my family. And so I try to take off from my obsession with posting this podcast as elaborate and comprehensive as I want it to be on Monday through Thursday. But that doesn't mean I don't have an amazing conversation with David Rothkopf today. The first part of which we talked about how his studying theater and working in the theater has educated and informed him how to understand politicians and their performances. I thought that was a really interesting conversation. And then we talked about his Daily Beast article that deals with all of the fallout and the thoughts around the Ivy League presidents testifying, one of which resigning, all of that. It's really good. I love his take. It's super interesting. I love this conversation. I think you will as well. And before I get to it, just want to remind you that Stand Up with Pete Dominic Community Hangout, Friday and Saturday, March 22nd, 23rd in Vegas. Get your plane tickets in your hotel rooms now. More information later. But it looks like I'll have Jay Alcovan, Ophira Eisenberg, Christian Finnegan, John Carroll headlining with the music. It's going to be awesome. Podcasts all day, comedy and music at night. Friday night we'll all hang out as well. Anybody that wants to come, just giving you a heads up. We'll get that ticket link up and more details ASAP, but we're literally producing it on the fly. Thank you to longtime listener, very generous subscriber, my friend Cassie in Vegas, and a lot of other listeners volunteering and supporting in any way they can. So hopefully I will see you out there in person. How about it? All right. Well, let's get to it. Again, sorry, no news. I'll get back to it. Next week is going to be epic. I got some really good guests booked already, and I plan to do the full show every day next week for you. So just a heads up on that. But right now it's time for David Rothkopf, who is also the head of Deep State Radio, which is a great series of podcasts. And he's got Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, on. You can go listen to that right now. It is up, and get his book, read his articles, several books. He is an author. He's a former undersecretary at the Commerce Department, and a real smart guy and a good friend who apparently majored in theater in college and then worked in theater for years as well. And that is where we start with my conversation with David Rothkopf. Let's do it. And we are on. I know you like to do vocal exercises, but I'm just going to head right into it, Rothkopf. Thank you for joining me.
Okay.
Appreciate you being here.
Me, mamo, moo, me, may, mamo, moo.
That's the one I did. That's the one I used to do.
Is it?
Yep. Before in theater school taught me that.
That's when I was a theater major. That's what I did.
Oh, you were a theater major? I knew that. You worked in the industry for years. Actually, I didn't know you.
7 or 8 years. I was a theater director.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. But I mean, like going to college for theater.
Yeah, well, I had to also take economics and history because of my parents, but I did both.
Very cool. Is that still something that you have a big part in your life?
I don't know. I've always kind of wanted to write a book called Everything I Know About Politics I Learned in the Theater.
Ooh.
Because, there's so many aspects of it, from tackling projects to dealing with people to, I don't know, the stuff that I learned about connecting with audiences. And
I think it helps you probably especially tell the difference between someone's public and private persona, which is something that all politicians, all people in media kind of have, but you can see how close the two are when they're performing.
Yeah. No, and also, sort of being in the moment, or, one of the things that I was talking to my wife about this, who is a government is still a professional opera singer. And one of the things that you learn when you're a performer that most people don't learn is to listen to the audience. I'm sure you, as a comedian, you do that, because if they don't laugh, then you say, maybe I shouldn't head in this direction. But it's harder for people who aren't a performer. One of the things you learn is to listen to your audience. Now, if you're a comedian, if they're not laughing, it's not working.
Right.
But if you're not a comedian, there's a lot of cues you get from the audience as to whether what you're saying is being understood, is resonating, and so forth. But a lot of people, politicians, they stand up, they read a speech. They just read it, and they relate to the paper in front of them. And so they can't really tell, they don't really have a relationship with the audience. And that's really important. And, one of the things you hear about certain politicians today is, they don't seem authentic.
Right.
And authentic means, that you're connecting with the audience, and they believe you and you believe them, and so forth. And I'm just listening to the audience is a gift.
I think that there's so many examples we can talk about who's good at that, but you talk about delivering a speech. Yeah, that's one thing. A lot of people can deliver a speech that's well written pretty well. It's different if you're in an interview with a journalist, if we're talking about politicians, or in a debate, as they were the other night, and you're Ron DeSantis, and the problem that he has with performing is it's so easy to make fun of him, and we should, but like his face and his tongue and his head, they do things that normal people, much less politicians, don't do, and it leaves the audience wondering about his species.
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly he's a lizard person, but, having set that aside, there's a lot of people out there who are somewhere on the spectrum,
Yeah, sure.
And they're not, they're high-functioning people, but they have some of the problems people with Asperger's do. They can't read clues. They don't know, whether, they're not good with emotions. By the way, that helps in some people. I was talking to somebody yesterday, there's something I call reporter personality disorder. And reporter personality disorder is that there's certain things that make it really hard for a normal person to ask an awkward question to somebody else. But if you're a little bit on the spectrum, you can't read those. That makes you a good reporter, because you're willing to go up to somebody and say, let me ask you this thing, about, did you sleep with your mother? And blah, blah. And they don't mind. So it makes them a good reporter, and then, you combine that with people being nervous, which sort of shuts down a bunch of things. And so you get combination. Like Ron DeSantis is clearly on the spectrum. He's not a normal person. A normal person doesn't laugh, when a joke is told, and it's like joke, beat,
ha
ha ha, but that's what he does.
It makes you wonder how he gets to be the governor of Florida. But it's this conversation and this idea, this subject, makes you wonder how certain people become leaders at all. And there's all different kinds of paths and different reasons. But one to narrow in on is authoritarians. And I always have found it strange that people could fall for someone who paints their skin or does something with their hair. And we're talking, Mussolini, Saddam, Gaddafi, Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, to a lesser extent, but still with the shirtless horse riding and all that bullshit. Like, how do people fall for that is the question. Clearly, this performance is gone too far. It's not a great performance. It's over the top. I don't believe you. I don't believe your hair. I don't believe your hair.
Well, you made a joke earlier, which, I don't know if it was intentional, but Mussolini, I kind of thought about hair mousse.
Oh, how is it pronounced?
No, I think it's Mussolini, but you were emphasizing the mousse because of your joke.
That's right. That's what I was
which
thinking.
Is hilarity.
Thank you.
But, first of all, most public performances of speakers are in a theater. They're not in front of 1 million people. They're in front of several hundred people. And secondly, nowadays, that stuff doesn't even matter. What matters is a social media clip that's 30 seconds long and, may contain 6 edits. So you can make anybody look
Good point. Yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
And, we're just about to enter the age. We're already there with singers with auto-tune, but we're about to enter the age of AI auto-tune, in which there's going to be like a filter, and all of a sudden Pete's going to appear normal.
And not like
Pete's just a regular guy.
And not what are you saying I am now? Not normal?
I'm not saying anything.
It seems like you're saying that
I didn't even mean you.
AI
I just meant
it sounds like
anybody named Pete.
What I heard was that AI is going to make me more palatable, is what I heard.
Speaking of, showbiz, I once worked with somebody and we were producing a bunch of commercials. But then they asked me to step in and do some of the voiceover. And so I started to do some of the voiceover. And they kept giving me this direction. I was like, not responsive. And the director kept saying, "You're hearing this with your ears." I didn't really know what that meant, but, I do now. And you just heard that with your ears, Pete.
A shorter version of that lesson is we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. And what I heard...
That's exactly... who used to talk about that all the time? Bill Clinton. He talked about something called the meta message. And the idea was your speech isn't the words you read. It's the words the audience hears. And so you may say one thing and think it means X. If I say the word truck to you, I may think I'm talking about a truck, but you may then flash back to your toy truck that was your whole childhood joy that went down the toilet one day and never was seen again. And it's a trigger for you. In other words, it can mean different things to different people. And that's why all communication is collaboration, because it's collaboration between the communicator and the listener. And
why political communication, more specifically, needs to be what?
Well, I think in the current age where everything is edited and produced, people don't trust it.
Right.
And so when you can get small scale interaction and see it up close, Kamala Harris is a good example. A lot of people say, oh, she's not a great communicator. But when you see her in a one-on-one conversation, or you're in a one-on-one conversation with her, she's great. And so there are a lot of politicians who would benefit more from being in that kind of format than in this, which is where there's give and take and interaction with human being, than in some presentational format where they stand up and dominate the stage. Weirdly, Trump is pretty good at that, standing up on a stage, and he gets relaxed and he kind of banters with the audience, and they love that. He's got that kind of thing that a good performer, good comedian,
He's got a bit now that he does about, who is it? Somebody trying to lift weights or something. I think he's making fun of Biden, and it sounds every time Jimmy Kimmel clipped it up, or somebody did back to back, because he always does the same bit, and it just sounds like he's having an orgasm. And he's done the bit so many times that they could just put it back to back. He's like, it's just so awful and hilarious. But it's to your point that, but his act is filled with those kinds of moments. And more importantly, I think he's often just punching down at people, and it gets huge laughs. It works. He said Joe Biden the other day, he said, Joe Biden doesn't know he's alive. And I found it really mean, but also a little bit funny. Like, what a terrible thing to say, even to somebody that was experiencing cognitive decline, but still so stupid, but it works.
Well, it works for your audience, and that's, again, the thing is you have to hear your audience. You know what your audience is. And he draws an audience that wants to hear that. They're pissed off. Their lives aren't going very well. They're angry. They need some means of getting that out of their system. And in comes Trump, and he goes, you know what? All these guys, these Ivy League university, or these president, or these Democrat, or these people, they're assholes, and let's make fun of them together.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, hey, great. We're, it's like, you're at the bar, without getting too weirdly like academic about this. but this is weirdly academic, but I'll keep it short. I read a book once on sort of neuroscience and art. And one of the things it talked about was that around the turn of the century, last century, you had abstract art coming into being, cubism, all these other kinds of things.
Ugh.
And, well, yeah, you say that. But, the critics would go to it, and they were used to seeing a picture of a mountain that looked like a mountain and so forth. And now there were all these squiggles on a page. And they created a term. There's a bunch of German critics. They created the term. And it's called the beholder's share.
Sure.
And the beholder's share is that when you create a piece of abstract art, the art is created between that and the mind of the viewer.
Yes.
The viewer is helping to create the art. And that's true in politics too.
Yes.
It's
just to speak for the artists, because I did go to school for visual arts, fine arts as well, and always studied it. And obviously I'm a performer and went to theater. But, I hate certain comedians and really don't like that people laugh at them. And I definitely hate most abstract art. But that means nothing. And what's more annoying than someone who's going to say, as a comedian, I don't like that people are laughing at you, or as an artist, I don't like that people like that. It is very, what's the phrase? It's hypocritical, really. It's back to the point that we're talking about. You like the things that you like. And you know what? It's good if people like art, period. They're coming to see art. That helps your art. It's good if people like comedy, period. They're going to see comedy. That helps your comedy. So support.
Well, I always say this big condescending thing, which is there are two kinds of people in life. There are people who get the joke and there are people who don't get the joke. And life is too short for the people to spend time around the people who don't get the joke. Now, is the joke the great metaphysical joke about the universe, or is it just the joke you're telling? We can discuss that. But the reality is that I was sitting around this weekend and I noticed that there was a new Sarah Silverman special, and I started watching it and I thought it was hilarious. But that's because every joke was a sort of semi-educated Jewish American life joke. And I was like, oh yeah, she's speaking my language.
Yeah. My dad, who's probably, I don't know how many, 15 years older than you. And he wouldn't, not Jewish, wouldn't like it as much. I would. I love Sarah Silverman. I came up with those comedians, but yeah, I get your point fully. It's perfectly illustrated by that example. I got to see that.
Well, but all I'm saying is that the same is true with politicians, and the most successful politicians and the most successful performers are the ones who can relate to the biggest audiences.
Right. And those biggest audiences, it's easy to say that they shouldn't get those audiences, but that's not going to get you anywhere. Understand?
Well, it's not. And the reality is that the Trump show doesn't work beyond 40% of the American people. The whole question is whether Donald Trump is running against somebody who appeals to 41% of the American people. Exactly. And true of smaller elections too, right? In my town, you needed 3,000 votes, 2,000 votes. How do you appeal to them? Well, in my town, be a fireman. That's politics. That's politics. But what I'm getting at, and that's show business.
Yes.
They're niche comedians, and then they're comedians who reach, and they get super, you get up to, and I don't want to name, but you get up to like
Sarah Silverman.
Sarah Silverman is at one level, but it will always be sort of at a niche. Then you get up to the level like, Jay Leno got to a certain level by becoming bland and intolerable to listen to.
But a lot of people love that. So,
well, that's the point. You had to get a lot,
according to you.
His whole shtick was, unless he got 11 million people to think that was funny. But, he went, he said, I'm going to get the 11 million who are going to laugh at
What do you think what would you rather listen to? Jay Leno's stand up or nails on a chalkboard?
Oh, B. Definitely B.
All right. Let me get to your story or piece that I really wanted to talk to. I can always talk with Rothkopf. We can about just about anything. And I've loved this conversation already, as always. But You've got the piece of pieces, the piece I needed to understand and to talk about, I believe, which is about the canceling of the university presidents. Canceling university presidents won't end anti-Semitism is the title of it. But man, I just almost want to read it to everybody. I've been ignoring this story. So I read your piece. It gave me a lot of context, but you have a lot of concerns about where we're headed based on this latest example of canceling. Why?
Well, first of all, these university presidents, 3 presidents, president of MIT, president of Harvard, president of Penn, got together in a congressional hearing, and they were asked a bunch of questions about anti-Semitism on campus. One of the questions that they were asked was from Elise Stefanik, a congresswoman from New York.
Adirondacks, Lake George area.
Yeah, from the moon, as far as I'm concerned. But she was there, and she said, if somebody called for genocide, would that constitute harassment? And the response of the university presidents, because of the nature of their job, was it depends on the context. And people went berserk. Like, how can you say it depends on the context? Genocide is always bad. There are a few problems with this whole thing. One, there were no demonstrations on any of these campuses where people were actually calling for genocide. Okay, so that's problem number
That
one.
wasn't the question she asked, though, was it?
No, it wasn't the question, because she wasn't asking about what happened at the university. She was trying to create a gotcha question for these people. What people were calling for were things that may or may not be interpreted as having a genocidal element. Now, you're probably listening and going, well, wait a minute. Anything that sounds even remotely like genocide shouldn't be discussed. Well, let's just take one of these things. There's a phrase, from the river to the sea. Now, from the river to the sea, if a Hamas terrorist says it, is we're going to destroy all the Jews and we're going to take back all this land. But it could also be, if somebody else with a different predisposition says it, that we want a Palestine that is contiguous, that goes from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, like it used to for us. We don't want it broken into 2 pieces, where you've got Gaza and the West Bank, and there's a political goal. Now, you may say that calls for the moving the Jews out, and that's a bad thing. Well, again, that's a political debate. We're currently in the middle of a war in which Israel has displaced 2 million of 2.2 million people in Gaza, in which members of the Netanyahu cabinet have said we should consider shipping the people from Gaza to Egypt or someplace else. So that's considered acceptable political debate. It's not. The point is, if you're a university president, what's your objective? It's to allow debate within a safe context based on certain kinds of rules. And promoting that, and that creates intellectual ferment. Now, there's a hypocrisy in Elise Stefanik asking these questions, because Elise Stefanik has publicly promoted replacement theory, white supremacist theory, which is by implication genocidal. She's publicly promoted the big lie. She doesn't care about, law. She doesn't actually care what's happening here. It's that the right wing has been pissed off for years that when they had some guy who was preaching eugenics, who was saying white people are better than black people, and campuses were saying, well, no, you can't actually come here because that's not true. That there is this gating issue, which is you have to speak of things that are intellectually defensible, and that's not intellectually defensible. That's pissed them off, and they've said, well, there's a great liberal bias here, and we have to get rid of it. And that's what worries me the most. What worries me the most is there's a gotcha question. The answer, which was the right answer, context matters, was dismissed. There's a litmus test component to this thing. Either you agree with our political position or you don't. And by the way, it's muddied further by the fact that one of the big issues was what is anti-Semitism and what isn't anti-Semitism. And there's a move afoot now, led by the right, to say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
Right.
And which is, if you don't believe in the idea that Jews are entitled to a homeland in this particular place, then you're an anti-Semite. Well, that's just not true. There have been millions of Jews since that idea was first floated in modern times in 1897 by Theodor Herzl, who have said, no, I don't buy that. And so that's not anti-Semitic. It's a.
And yet Nikki Haley said that exactly that. I'm reading in your article.
Right.
To be anti-Zionist is to be anti-Semitic. And you said there's a campaign.
They want to pass a law. They want to pass a law that if you say something anti-Zionist, then you're anti-Semitic. Now, by the way, all of this is part of the current Israeli government's effort to make any criticism of what they do be condemned, not as political debate, but as anti-Semitism, as hate speech. And, that's another component of this thing. But where does it lead? Where does it lead when these, loud politicians and donors can sort of reshape what's acceptable or not acceptable in campus discourse? Not to a good place. And now the president of the University of Pennsylvania, who's a highly respected legal scholar, has had to resign. And the chairman of her board, who is so sort of upset by this whole process, also resigned. Now, today the Harvard trustees have said we're sticking by our president, Claudine Gay, and the MIT board has done the same thing with their president. But it's dangerous. And my final point is, and if you want to look where it's going, look at the universities in Florida, where, Ron DeSantis has said you can't teach certain things.
Right.
You can't teach or you can't have diversity requirements, and you can't teach gender studies, and you can't teach about people being gay, and you can't teach about these things. These are related issues. And I think anybody who is cares about quality of education, whether you're conservative or a liberal, you've got to say, how do you create a quality education? And that is, you create a safe environment to have open discussions about fact-based or intellectually rigorously governed issues within limits.
An example of which would be to take a phrase like "from the river to the sea" out of the street protest where you're chanting it into a classroom to discuss what that means, because the argument, I'm going to go ahead and say a lot of people that are out chanting that, young people, don't know quite, have a really good policy prescription or future for the Jewish people of Israel, for Israelis, if that. You explain the different things that could mean to somebody. Jewish people, for example, willing to live in a Palestinian state. It could mean all kinds of things that aren't genocide, but it's for a classroom discussion to have. And that's what learning in college should be about.
And what you've just said is it depends on the context.
Yeah.
For which these people were pilloried, right? If somebody is standing in front of a mob of people with torches and axe handles saying, from the river to the sea, we're going to get everybody who stands in our way. That's creating a threatening environment. That's harassment. That shouldn't take place. If somebody says it in the context of a classroom discussion, let's take this phrase and try to understand what it really means to different groups. That is suitable.
The thing that really is so upsetting to me, and you touch on it in your piece and you mentioned it here, is the idea that Elise Stefanik is saying what is or what is not anti-Semitic, what are not, good for Jewish people. And you mentioned some of the things she said and done before. But to me, anybody who supports Donald Trump and is then calling somebody out for being anti-Semitic is in fact lying on themselves. Donald Trump, you talk about, people don't mention this nearly enough. I want to be the guy who's shouting from the rooftops. Donald Trump was hanging out with Nick Fuentes and Kanye West while they were walking around talking about how great Hitler was. He had dinner with
Donald Trump's ex-wife, said that he went to bed with a book of Hitler speeches by his bed.
Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That I don't have any issue with. Who doesn't have a nightstand filled with?
Look, I don't want to know what's on your nightstand.
I'll tell you.
But yeah, okay. I'm sure it's just a glass with your teeth in it and a couple others. But the connection I was going to make is that he did that, and then there was a march in Charlottesville in which people said Jews will not replace us, and he said there were fine people on that side.
Yeah, well, there's so many examples of that, and it just the idea that you connect being pro-Israel means you're pro-Jewish is, of course, something that a lot of these evangelical folks do for the reasons we've talked about in the past that people, I think, hopefully understand at this point. But also, what about American Jews? What about what you're doing to them, saying to them, about them, all the time? The entire Republican Party. Nobody gets censured or denounced or anything else. They can say whatever the fuck they want. Right-wing media.
Think about what they say about George Soros. Do you think when they say George Soros's money is behind all this, they really mean that Hungarian money manager's money is behind all this? Or do they mean Jewish conspiracy? Well, and it's all about the Jews.
Are they?
The answer is it's all, this is code, and they use anti-Semitic code all the time.
Be consistent is all. Lee Stefanik, I'd love to hear you now question Elon Musk about his anti-Semitism. Let's go. Bring him in. Ask him. I don't think she's going to somehow.
No. Well, they're not. But because their goal isn't, as you and I've talked about here, they don't care about the Jews.
No.
They care about evangelical support. And evangelical support is for Israel. It's not for, they just want a government in Israel, ideally a right-wing government that agrees with them, that enables the end times to happen and the rapture to happen. They don't really care about what happens with the Jews. Now, interestingly, in this whole mix, a lot of Jewish organizations have said, well, hey, these people are useful allies, particularly in this moment of war, where we want to, preserve support for Israel despite all the hideous things that Israel is doing. And so they have come together with them. And we and I have talked about this, but I've written articles in which I say anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitism, and gotten calls from heads of big Jewish organizations saying, don't you know that if the Nazis came again, they'd come for you? And you need Israel. And I'm like 40 ex-members of my family were killed by the Nazis. My father escaped the Nazis. I get what the Nazis do. But I think there are a lot of, solutions. And in fact, the vast majority of Jews, not the vast majority, a slight majority of Jews in the world don't live in Israel. They live someplace else. A big number of them live in the United States. And, personally, since I believe in separation of church and state, I'm more comfortable living in a diverse society that focuses on tolerance than I am in a theocratic society that rewards people based on their ethnic background or religious
beliefs. Well, then you are going to hate America.
Yeah, well,
we are headed towards a Christian nationalism, or maybe not. But I think the other thing that's just worth getting your quick response to is the only thing worse than the Jews is the Muslims. And so American politics, Republican politics, when it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict, they're siding with the Israelis because their Israelis are obviously more palatable and understandable and relatable, blah, 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 than the Palestinians in this conflict, or frankly, than the Muslims against anyone else. Isn't that always at play in American domestic politics, and it's certainly how Republicans respond to it, and obviously how Democrats do too, because overwhelmingly Jewish Americans vote for Democrats, but the people who overwhelmingly support the Palestinian cause are also Democrats.
Yeah. This gets to one of the core problems that Jews have in America that nobody talks about. But this is a safe space. I feel safe here. So I'm going to talk about it. Jews are white, but Jews are also Jews. And so certain people embrace Jews for their whiteness when it suits them and condemn them for their Jewishness when it suits them.
Trying to think of a joke about how it would out you in case anybody's not able to tell the difference.
Out me for what? My whiteness or my Jewishness?
No, we could see you're white.
Yeah, well, you could also, there are a lot of people. I mean, you would have the number of tweets that I get, particularly now in the era of Elon, where there's 3 parentheses around my name, or whether there's some cartoon about Jews or whatever, or there's a picture of me that gets used, and all you use the same picture. And apparently, and I've never been really aware of this. I have a big nose, and I always thought it was adorable. But people are like, oh yeah, no, he's Jew. That's a Jewy face. You have a very Jewy face, Rothkopf. You're very, and I recognize there's a lot of anti-Semitism. I grew up in a house where, in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey, where on mischief night, people would come and draw swastikas on our driveway. We've seen this stuff throughout our lives. Jews have seen it. The question is, how do we want to deal with it? And there's a political debate about that, and it's reasonable to have that debate. What I object to is misusing the term anti-Semitism to defend the indefensible policies of a political regime in Israel. And to say, well, no, you can't criticize them.
It's if it were about any American domestic or foreign policy, we wouldn't have that hang up, or most other countries. Obviously, it's the Jewish state, the history.
And also, and there's an old reflex, and I'm me, I'm like a liberal, and I'm like, pro democracy. So I'm like pro Joe Biden, who I think's done a good job as president. But last night at the White House, he said that if it were not for the state of Israel, no Jew would be safe. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? First of all, if it were not for the United States, the state of Israel would not be safe. But secondly, a lot of people have not made that their choice. And honestly, if the Jewish state, such as it is also a racist state that's in the middle of slaughtering tens of thousands of innocent people, that is not, as my grandma used to say, good for the Jews.
It is not. It is not good for the Jewish people anywhere. Is a fair outcome. Is a fair opinion to have.
It's not. And
just like America's wars in Iraq were terrible for Americans and incited more terrorists to join the fight.
Absolutely right. And now you're blaming anti-Semitism on the Jews. No. Let's have a separate conversation.
Right.
Anti-Semitism exists. It's a scourge. We should do away with it. We need to promote understanding. We need to condemn it where it occurs. We shouldn't hesitate. But governments like the Netanyahu administration in Israel, they shouldn't be in power. They made Israel more vulnerable to that attack. They helped enable the rise of Hamas.
Yeah.
They looked away from the threats as they existed. They have fought against democracy in Israel. They have helped create an apartheid state. And they are now in the middle of what I suspect by the time sort of this phase of fighting ends in January, maybe the deaths, be responsible of the deaths of 30,000 innocent civilians, 70% of whom are women and children, and essentially the destruction of all of Gaza. Right now, 100,000 buildings have been destroyed. The dislocation of all of Gaza, a gigantic humanitarian crisis, and that was not the only choice they had to defend themselves. And they chose that, and they should be condemned for that.
But it should not become anti-Semitic, obviously.
And it's not anti-Semitic. It's anti-Likud. It's anti-Bibi Netanyahu.
It's anti-Israeli government policy. This current government's policy, just like Bush lying us into war in Iraq and ignoring the threats from Richard Clark that Richard Clark brought him and others that bin Laden was determined to strike in America. After the guy before him, Bill Clinton, tried to kill bin Laden with cruise missiles, ended up blowing up a children's medicine factory, and a lot of kids died as a result. But he wasn't ignoring bin Laden, is my point.
Well, and just imagine in 2 years that you're traveling through Latin America and they say, how come your country has a bunch of Latinos in concentration camps? Because Donald Trump has done that. You know, Americans hate, you know, we just have to have the fairly simple capability to distinguish between what is political and, you know, what is cultural, what is an attack on an ethnic group, and what is an argument against a policy position.
Well said, all of it. And this is great. What else do we have to say? Is there anything else? Or should I close up the shop? And
no, we did. I would say this. I mean, I don't normally promote this kind of thing, but last night we hosted a conversation with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
Ooh.
And we did it with New Republic, and it was a great conversation. He was literally left the conversation to go talk to Zelensky about, you know, this problem. There was a very real problem that we have. The United States funding looks like it's going to dry up, and it now looks like the Republicans are not going to vote on it until early next year. Jake remained optimistic that we would ultimately get to it. And he's going to Israel at the end of the week. So we talked about a lot of the issues about what comes next in that war. And we talked about a bunch of other things, including, you know, command and control of nuclear weapons and the rise of AI. And if you go to the DSR network, you can listen to the podcast, a version of it, or
I found it. Here it is. I'll link to it in the show notes, a conversation with Jake Sullivan. This looks great. I'm sorry.
If you go to the Deep State Radio YouTube channel, you can watch it.
Oh, look at you. You're getting fancy with video?
Yeah. Yeah. We have TikToks of it. We've got.
Look at you. You got to be on the TikTok. You got to be everywhere. Deep State Radio, which I wish I had listened to that before I talked to you, but I'll go listen to it now, and then we'll talk about it.
Well, maybe it's, you know, they can talk to me again.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I enjoy this.
I always love it, especially today. I'll let you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you very much for listening to my talk with David Rothkopf today. Go listen to his talk with Jake Sullivan. Get his book, read his articles, subscribe to The Daily Beast. Most importantly for him, subscribe to Deep State Radio right now. So many great shows and productions over there. I always love him when he joins, love it when he joins us over here, and love him. You know what I meant. Okay. Well, it's off to the mountains, the Green Mountains for me. I'm not sure I'll get a show up tomorrow as soon as I would like, but I will try to get something up. I've got a great conversation with J.L. Covan coming your way and more. So stay tuned, and also probably won't be doing a hangout, maybe an hour on Thursday night. I should have said that at the top of the show, but I'll drop that on the Thursday show. Either way, I'll let people know. Thank you very much for listening. Love you guys. Thanks for your patience with me and a little time off this week with my family and friends in the mountains. Thank you so, so much. I'll talk to you later.
Off of your fence. what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. Alright, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand